Hello, this is Adam Craig with From Open Review to Reproducible Review, Fair Metrics Analysis of Open Peer Reviews for Brain Informatics Literature. So the peer review process is essential to scholarly literature. It's what maintains the quality of the scientific record. But how do you assess the quality of peer review? Usually that responsibility falls to an editor, a conference organizer, someone of that sort. But then how? How do they do? So if we look at just subjective questionnaires of review quality, there's quite a bit of disagreement. First, among any two editors, or even more so between editors and the authors of the papers being reviewed. And then even an editor can come back to their own rating, give a review a second look, and decide they disagree with their past review. So then can we objectively measure review quality? We looked through the literature and only found 2 attempts at this, and both are really, when it comes down to it, measures of review quantity, not review quality. One has just a count of number of reviewers and editors on the case, and the other is just amount of text. Now, in both cases, they give ways of weighting things and adjusting the scores a little. With the number of people on it, they weight it by the Hirsch indices, and with the amount of text, it's categorized as positive or negative, constructive or unconstructive. But whether it's how influential someone is or how constructive, destructive, unconstructive, positive or negative something is, you're still introducing an element of subjectivity back into it. So then what even defines good peer review? What's the standard? So if you look at studies of attempts to improve peer review, they tend to use rather different questionnaires. There's no standard measure of how much any of these attempts to improve peer review by anonymizing reviewers, by giving them checklists or training them in what to look at, have any sort of effect. So this on some level speaks to disagreement among the scholarly community as to how to measure the quality of the peer reviews themselves. So if we can't agree on what constitutes good peer review, can we then let the readers decide for themselves? That's the idea behind the open peer review movement. But here too, there's a certain amount of controversy. People have weighed in on how far it should go, whether we should publish the names of reviewers alongside the reviews to recognize the good work of good reviewers and hold bad reviewers accountable, or should we just allow some sort of dialogue between the reviewers and authors prior to publication, or should it just be the reviews themselves online but anonymous? We here at Brain Health Alliance, though, say even the fully implemented open review approach doesn't take things far enough. It's not enough to just say what the reviewers said, but on what basis they said. So what we propose is reproducible peer review, the idea that a second reviewer should be able to see what facts the original reviewer invoked to justify their decision, follow their reasoning, and arrive at the same conclusion. So to make that more than just a new buzzword or trendy phrase, though, you need metrics of how well a reviewer does make their review reproducible. So to a starting point, we started with the design principles we had earlier used for the FAIR metrics of measuring the fair attribution to indexed reports, as we call it, for scholarly works. So those are founded on 3 design principles. A scholarly work should make clear the source of ideas it presents, that the ideas are the same when they're equivalent in meaning, regardless of wording, and that the record itself should be recorded and published of how the evaluation took place, preferably in a machine readable format, something semantic web friendly in the best case scenario. So previously, we had used these design principles to come up with 4 metrics, 4 fair metrics of how well a scholarly work grounds itself in the prior literature. And did that by first identifying key claims in the work and then categorizing them and using the counts of how many claims fit into each category. So how many are correctly attributed to prior works, how many are misattributed, misrepresenting what some prior work says, how many are genuinely novel, and how many are plagiarized from prior works. We then use those to construct some ratios, each emphasizing a different aspect of those 4 counts. So now how do we apply that to peer reviews instead of to the scholarly works themselves? So the idea is there's some opinion, but the opinion isn't necessarily right or wrong. The question is, how well is it grounded in facts? What factual claims does the author of the review, the reviewer, pose in order to justify their rating? So the key difference here is we don't expect a reviewer to introduce completely new, novel facts and information just from that haven't appeared anywhere else. Instead, we just look at whether their claims are properly attributed or misattributed, and we just sort of lump in with that unattributed ones that don't seem to be based on anything in a clear way. So then to make it a bit more finer grained, we also divvy those counts up into T, V, and D. So T for target are the claims about the work itself being reviewed. V, are they about the venue, like how the venue requires, say, a certain scope, certain formatting, or other standards, versus D, domain knowledge. What's some outside information beyond just what's in the call for papers or call for proposals or in the work itself? And based on those, we now have 6 counts, both A and M, each divided up into T, V, and D. And then you can use those to construct one ratio for T, one for V, one for D, and then a pooled ratio of overall how well justified the opinion is. Now, we previously tried out 5 test cases just to illustrate what we were talking about. So one of these is a fictional review of a fictional paper that we just created to illustrate how these concepts of target, venue, and domain all apply. Then we picked 2 reviews of a rejected grand challenge proposal we submitted to ACM Multimedia, put a pin in that, and then 2 published peer reviews of an article that was accepted to Nature Communications. Just one we picked because I happened to think it was interesting to come out recently at the time. So as you can see, the counts in practice are quite sparse. In our synthetic example, we picked 1 from T, 1 from V, 1 from D, just to illustrate how those concepts apply, whereas most of the 4 real-world reviews that we chose only talked about the paper itself and didn't say anything about the venue requirements explicitly or about outside knowledge. Now, that might suggest that some of these are overkill, that maybe we don't need B or D, but we here at Brain Health Alliance disagree. We say that those are things that a good review should address: how the work meets or doesn't meet the requirements of the venue, and how it fits into the larger context of outside knowledge. So just to illustrate what we mean, we'll go through for the synthetic example here. So the synthetic example review is quite short. It's only got 4 statements in it. And one is, this work is out of scope. That's the opinion. And then saying that the paper itself is about this human curated decision tree that's about drugs and drug targets and such symptoms. And so that's a correct statement about the work itself. Then it says the scope of the conference is biomedical applications of AI. Again, we're saying that's a true statement about the conference, the venue. And then, though, when they invoke outside knowledge, they're claiming that human curated decision trees are not AI, and in this case, they do have a source for it, but that source actually says quite a bit more on the subject and clearly gives a much more inclusive definition of AI, in which pretty much any sort of software, including decision trees, would reasonably qualify, meaning they've misrepresented domain knowledge. Based on that, we have 1A here, 2 A's and an M, and we get 2 1s and a -1 for the ratios, leading to an overall score of 1/3. Now, to give this another try, bit more substantive, we searched the websites of 6 publishers purporting to practice open peer review. We looked for brain informatics and brain imaging data management because those are topics important to us here at Brain Health Alliance. And we selected 1 to 4 articles from each. So ended up with 14 articles altogether. Each of them had 2 or more published reviews. So we basically looked at 2 from each, for a total of 28 reviews. Then we didn't look at second pass reviews because those just aren't very substantive in general, sort of a rubber stamp, if you will. So you can see what we've listed here below: eLife, F1000, iOS, Nature Research, Open Research Year, which is actually a subsidiary of F1000, it turns out, and Oxford University Press. And then, because just for reasons of time, won't go into too much detail, but some of the key trends we noticed in our new analysis were reviews were mostly fairly short, but we did get up to about 12 supporting claims. Then misrepresentations, by far the most common was reviewers complaining that something was missing, some piece of information, when actually the authors had given that information, had said what needed to be said. Whereas explicit misrepresentations, saying something was there when it wasn't, were relatively rare, with just 2 cases. Then there weren't a lot of explicit references to venue requirements, just for, but like for correct references. But then we also saw that misrepresentations of common practices as requirements, like people just being really sticklers for sort of common standards, like the usual 4 or 5 sections of a paper or some other bit of formatting, when that wasn't explicitly a venue requirement, occurred a couple of times. Then what also stands out, though, is that explicit references to outside domain knowledge were quite rare, with only 3 instances. As such, it seems like the practice of properly, explicitly referencing prior work in a review has just fallen out of common practice. Though keep in mind, we're also only looking at accepted articles. Maybe they either didn't have as many criticisms to give based on prior work for these already well-sourced, well-researched articles, or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the quality of reviews for works that were rejected are actually worse. We don't know, because they're not published. All right, so now, as we mentioned before, we want these reviews themselves to be, these parametrics analyses of reviews themselves to be reproducible. And to aid that, we've created a parametrics module in the larger PDP Dream ontology that Brain Health Alliance maintains. And so we previously designed the parametrics part of the PDP Dream ontology to have classes and properties that would help us document the parametrics analysis process for papers. We've now added ones that we need for the parametrics analysis of peer reviews, like having items, data properties that let us record the counts, obviously, and the metrics themselves, and also classes for all 6 kinds of statements. But then you can see for yourself an example of how this applies by going to this URL, and then for our example review. And you can also look through this in our curation app with Fidentinus, which is a special directory where we sort of quarantine things that are not actual good resources. Originally, it was for works that we suspect to be plagiarized, but in this case, it's for work that doesn't exist at all. But you get the idea. So now, mentioned the Parametrics Multimedia Grand Challenge before as something we proposed for ACM Multimedia, but since they didn't want to be a part of it, we're holding it ourselves. So the idea is being very systematic and carefully analyzing a work is more work. It's more work than just saying, I don't like this. So how do we make that more palatable to people? And so what we hope to do is create software tools to make it less labor intensive, less time consuming. Even if we can't eliminate actual human thought and judgment from the process, we can take care of a lot of the fiddly sort of bits, like extracting text and placing it in a sort of tabular format and ultimately into the RDF documents, then separate text into discrete statements and maybe highlight which ones seem to be the key claims Also, we want to extract information from tables and figures and convert those into statements you can compare. And also have tools for like searching the literature, grabbing both cited sources and ones that the authors haven't cited, but that may have the same sort of claims in them. Oh, and also, because it's a grand challenge, we'll be awarding a cash prize currently planned for 3,000 US dollars, though may adjust that if we get some good grants or something. We'll see. But in any case, yes, we're looking for people to actually submit software that automates some or all of these steps of the process. And they'll be opening the Grand Challenge hopefully pretty early next year, 2025. So to sum up, reproducible peer review requires clear grounding of opinions in sourced facts. The FAIR metrics for peer reviews quantify accurate attribution of supporting claims. To further aid reproducibility, we record steps of the analysis in RDF documents using the PDP Dream Ontology FAIR metrics module. And these metrics have revealed substantive shortcomings in peer review in the Brain Informatics literature. And we hope to address some of this with the FAIR metrics, the multimedia FAIR metrics Grand Challenge, which will award cash prizes to developers who can automate parts of the analysis process. So, don't know why it automatically went back there, but right, just gonna scroll through references. So those of you watching the recording can pause, look up things. And you can also reach us via email here or the website. Thank you.